How does geometry affect an e-mountain bike? Well, maybe a better way of thinking about it is, how does geometry affect you when you're riding your e-mountain bike? Because geometry has an impact in many ways on such things as agility, comfort, control, fatigue, which is a big one, and then stability and weight distribution. Now, clearly all or some of those factors are going to have a big impact in how much fun you have on your e-mountain bike. But is it just about the geometry? Well, absolutely not. An e-mountain bike should be a system, not just a collection of parts and angles. There's many things to consider, such as the suspension design, because that affects just things as the stability and the agility of the bike. The battery placement will have an effect on the weight distribution. And of course, you need to get the sizing right. It's pointless having amazing geometry and angles if you get the sizing wrong, because that is going to have a huge, huge impact. Is there such a thing then as e-bike specific geometry? Well, yes, there is to a degree, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. First of all, if we compare traditional mountain bikes to e-mountain bikes in terms of geometry, well, they do seem to have been on a similar trajectory over the last decade. And that's unsurprising because, let's face it, mountain bikers and product managers do tend to copy each other. Harsh, I know, but true. But are we looking at a best e-bike geometry, or are we talking just simply a different e-bike geometry? Because there is a big difference. However, one thing is for sure, and I mentioned this earlier, what you do have to get right is fit and sizing. Now, sizing is fixed. Once you have bought your e-mountain bike, there is absolutely nothing you can do to change the frame size. Job done. But the question is then, do you trust a brand's recommendations, or maybe if you're buying from a shop, do you trust a shop owner's recommendations when it comes to size? Well, personally, I don't. Now, I'm 6 foot and Canyon recommend on their website that I ride a size large. However, I find for the best mix of stability and agility is for me to run an extra large. However, I can ride both sizes. Now, to confuse things, if you have a look at a comparison between, say, a Specialized Levo and a Kenevo in size large and S4, you will find the geometry and sizing radically different. The good news though, folks, is whilst sizing is fixed, you can still change the fit of your e-mountain bike by swapping such parts as the handlebar, the width and the height, the stem, long or short, and of course, the position of the seat in the rails. And by doing that, you will actually expand or contract the cockpit of your e-mountain bike. Time then to look at some of the most important geometry numbers on an e-mountain bike. Reach is measured from the center of the bottom bracket to the center of the top of the head tube. It's a great indicator of size relative to and between brands. And because fit can be changed, the fact that it isn't a perfect indicator in a seated position, it's incredibly important for your comfort while standing. Let's have a look at the differences in reach then between brands and for one size. Now, the size XL in a high bike full 7 is 454 millimeters. A Specialized Levo in size XL is 480, and a Spectral On from Canyon in the same size is 485. So as you can see, there's quite a difference between brands. So it's actually quite difficult to make a generalization when it comes to reach. Now, the head angle has a huge effect on the handling of your e-mountain bike. Steeper head angles mean a more lively ride, whereas slacker is in general more stable, but you really cannot view this figure in isolation. Now, the numbers on head angles are usually around 66 degrees for a mid-travel bike and about 63 for a downhill bike, whereas a short travel beast will be about 68. Brands measure seat angle differently, but slacker means more weight rearward and steeper means more weight forwards. The numbers are usually around 75 degrees for a mid-travel bike. Probably more important is your cockpit setup, suspension design, and how long is your chainstay. The chainstay is measured from the centre of the bottom bracket to the centre of the rear axle. Now the chainstay length is arguably one of the biggest differences between e-bikes and non-e-bikes. In terms of handling, a short chainstay means more weight over the rear wheel, which leads to sharper handling and an agile ride. However, sometimes shorter chainstays can sometimes make a bike feel smaller, and also, taken to the extreme, makes them tricky to tackle on super steep terrain simply because your weight is forced too far back. Wheelbase is measured from the rear axle to the front axle of your e-mountain bike. But we're talking here about the close relationship between the rear centre, which is the chainstay, and the front centre of the bike, which is measured from the bottom bracket to the front axle. Now, balance is key here. Long and slack or short and squirmy is the question. Well, too long and slack affects the agility of a bike. It becomes a little bit boring. E-bikes need to be agile with a strong suspension design that gives feedback. They need to be good climbers and stable descenders. Now, I can't emphasize just how important the relationship is between the front and rear center of your e-mountain bike, because it really does affect the control and also the weight distribution. Now let's have a look at a comparison between two 150mm travel bikes, a Levo and a Spectral, both in size large. Now, a Levo has a 781mm front center and a 455mm chainstay, excuse this big thick stick. The Spectral, on the other hand, has a 778mm front center and a 430mm chainstay. Chuck that stick away for a minute. Now, if you compare that to a longer travel bike, say the Specialized Kenevo, 180mm travel, now that has a longer 839mm front center and a 454mm chainstay. And the reason for that is because it's a longer travel bike and it needs that stability, and because it's being ridden in a downhill situation, it needs that short chainstay to dive in at the corners. Now, one final measurement on an e-mountain bike is the bottom bracket height, measured from the center of the bottom bracket to the ground. And in general, they're about 340 to 350 millimeters, which is the sweet spot. Now look, I could probably talk geometry all day long, but just because I can, doesn't really mean that I should. Time then, I think, to either hit that ice cold pool or head up into those beautiful Spanish mountains. I think I'll go for the latter. Oh, it. Don't forget to follow us on social media and give us a thumbs up if you like the video.